All right, I think we are live. Let me check this computer here and make sure that that's the case. Hi guys, if you can see this, post a message. I'm having a little connectivity problems this morning. I'm not quite sure what happened. It looks like happening now. Yeah, we're live. Perfect.
You obviously upset some spirits last night.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. I apologize.
Too many spirits, as the case may be.
Yeah, one of the two. All right. If you can see this, go ahead and post a message so I can let people know. All right. My friend James Corbin from New Orleans says we're good. So, all right. We've got some folks on. Oh, here they come. We got lots of people popping up here. So, thanks guys for joining us. We last week we took off for Mother's Day. Those of you that know me, my wife is a florist, and Mother's Day is always kind of an interesting week when you're married to a florist. And my this year was even more interesting with the current problems that we're having. So, Rolando Santos is my guest today, and Rolando has a resume that would fill the 2 hours. So we're going to kind of try to cram as much as we can in. I do have a few things that I want to talk about before we get started. The schedule for the next couple of weeks. Next week is Keith Olson, and Keith Olson is not a name that would be known to most of you. He's a local Northern Colorado law enforcement agent for almost 40 years. He retired a couple of years ago. He was recently featured on a Dateline, NBC's Dateline, for a murder that he spent over 25 years working on, and came out of retirement once it had been solved to finish it off. Keith is also writing the biography of Wilbur French, and if you've seen a mystery collection show, you've heard my version of Wilbur French story. And I told Keith that I operate under the Mark Twain adage: you never let the truth get in the way of a good story. So Keith will be next week. The following week is my friend Soydan and Chris Bogucki, the Big Icky, who is a sideshow performer who is great. After that, the next week, June 7th, is Vince Wilson and Paul Prater will be joining us to talk about ghost tours and how to incorporate history into the performance of magical arts. And then the 14th, June 14th, is a big one. We just shorted this up this week. It's going to be Dacre Stoker, great grandnephew of Bram Stoker, the author of Dracula. We're going to have a little contest between now and then through Gemini Artifacts, which is another thing I want to talk about, and we'll get to that here in a second. Some people have asked how they can help with the show. I'm going to try to increase the production value, get some editing software, and some ways to make this a little bit better. I do have a Venmo set up. It's at The Mystery Collection on Venmo. If you want to kick some in, I'll send you a shirt or a book or some of the fun stuff I have going. So without any more of my nonsense, let's talk a little bit about Rolando. I met Rolando. We've been at a convention a couple of times together and never really had a chance to sit down and talk. This past year, I was lucky enough to sit at the East Coast Spirit Sessions in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. In January, I was lucky enough to sit down next to Rolando at a lecture from a fellow performer, Lothar Malberg, from somewhere in the jungles of Canada. And Lothar talked a lot during the lecture about how he's a born-again evangelical Christian. And he talked a lot in the lecture about how he reconciles and how he performs spirit guiding and spirit talking to an audience that is typically of his ilk. And Rolando asked a question in a way nicer way than I would have. Rolando asked, how do you reconcile doing something that your guidebook says you shouldn't with your faith? And so I knew that I needed to be friends with Rolando. So I edged my way in and asked him a question that I knew that if all the people in that convention, that he would be the only one that would say yes if he had read the book Centennial, because I was going to use that in effect later. And Rolando told me that his grandpa was a general in the Mexican army. Is that correct? And that was charged with hunting Pancho Villa. And I thought, oh man, I've got to hear more of these stories. So that's the kind of my introduction to Rolando. I posted as soon as I got home. Rolando Santos is my new best friend, and so I finally got him to come on and hang out. So Rolando spent 40 years in journalism, 40 years plus in journalism. Was the CNN's the face of CNN in Latin America. Interviewed everybody from now saints to serial killers and everybody in between. So Rolando, I'll give you a few minutes to kind of let us into your world a little bit and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, so let me riff a little bit on what you're talking about. For the last 40 years, I've had the privilege to be a journalist, and I've traveled the world. During that time, I've been shot at more than a few times. I've been stalked by a satanic cult. I've been spied on by communist spies. I've had the opportunity to interview kings, queens, Anton LaVey, the head of the Church of Satan, as well as Mother Teresa. And across those 40 years, I've seen some things that fascinate me, that mystify me, and quite frankly, have terrified me. And that's what I like to share with people. And when we talk about the kind of performances and lectures that I give, that's what we're talking about, because that's me. That's my particular persona. And you were talking about the fact that we just quote unquote met. The reality is, I knew who Paul was quite a long time ago.
Well, we won't.
Raunchy and rowdy, as well as creative, preceded him, and we have several good friends in common. Paul Prater, for example, and a few others. So it's a privilege to be here with everybody today, and I'm looking forward to answering any questions I can about journalism, my particular career path, the things that I've seen, the things that have mystified me or terrified me, or all of the above. And any other questions you might have about magic. One of the other things that I am is I'm the past president of International Brotherhood of Magicians.
If you have any questions, go ahead and post them on the Facebook feed. I've got the laptop over here, and I can read the questions in real time. So I'll try my hardest not to interrupt, but to try to get all of your questions in. So you're foremost a journalist, and you've added magic into that. And I imagine that there's a lot of one of the things that we have in common amongst our friends that you mentioned is we're storytellers who do magic. You know, I don't consider myself a magician. You and I've talked a little bit about this off of camera, that we are mystery performers or mystery entertainers. That magician has a little bit of a connotation to it that doesn't really tell what we do. I've had people complain, other magicians complain when they see my show. They say, "Don't you understand how boring you were? You only did 8 tricks in 90 minutes." Right, and that's the response I hope to get. So tell us a little bit about how you got into magic and when you decided that the storytelling magic was the way you wanted to go.
Well, how I got into magic is interesting because I was born and raised on the Texas-Mexico border, and I wanted to every Saturday at 9 a.m. my time watch the Alakazam Hour with Mark Wilson and Anya Darnell. And Mother decided that I was supposed to have piano lessons, and of course, Mother won. So that seed was planted when I was a youngster. Later on, when I retired from, I didn't retire, but I transitioned from being an on-air reporter after 16 years to go into management. I had an opportunity to go to the Magic Castle, and I met Johnny Thompson.
Oh, wow.
And I saw the great Tom Zoney, and that piqued my interest. But mostly it was kind of a personal, scholarly thing. I didn't perform anything. So what made the difference was I was launching a network in Spain called CNN Plus in English for everybody. And I was having dinner one night, and there was a woman at a table behind me with her 3 adult daughters. She was an older lady, and she dropped her cane. So I got up, and I picked up the cane, and I gave her the cane, and I sat back down. And I'd been sitting there with a magic book and a deck of cards because I was alone, and I was, passing the time, just eating and stuff. And she said, "Are you a magician?" I said, No. And she said, "Please do something, please do something." And I just couldn't say no, right? Now, mind you, I had never performed in front of a live audience or anybody other than maybe my wife, right? And also, I'm going from English, translating what I'm supposed to be doing into Spanish, okay? So I did my thing. I did 3 or 4 effects. Everything worked, right, which was great. Sat back down, finished my meal, and then I walked away. And as I walked away, one of the daughters came to me and she said, "Thank you." And I said, "Oh, no, thank you. This is the first time I performed." She goes, "No, you don't understand. My mother's dying. This is her favorite restaurant."
Wow.
And now I can remember her laughing and having a good time.
That's awesome.
And that was when I decided I was going to be a magician rather than just someone who did tricks and studied magic.
Right, and that's that's a discussion that we have often amongst my pals, is that because you have a Svengali deck, or because you have does that make you a magician? I mean, if you own a violin, do you play the violin? I mean, are you a musician? I don't know. So I guess that's a much bigger question, is what makes somebody a magician? And I famously, it was interviewed in a magazine a couple years ago called Bandwagon, and they called the article "Most Magic Sucks." And that didn't win me a lot of friends, but I believe that, I primarily perform for adults, as I believe you do as well. And I don't believe adults want to be fooled or want to be tricked. I think they want to be entertained. And we talked earlier in the week, and I read the quote from Boy's Life about why we believe in magic and what magic means to us. And I kind of picked that vibe up from you as well, and hearing that story about that woman, that's what you wanted to leave her with, was kind of a gift. And then you took that as well. That was something you get to put in your pocket and take with you, that your gift to this woman was real magic. It was real magic. It wasn't the card trick, and it wasn't the move. It was the smile and the laughter.
I didn't realize the power of magic until that moment. Like everyone else, I thought magic was interesting, it was entertaining, it was fascinating, certainly from a historical perspective as a journalist, right? I did not understand the power. And I came to find out that magic is a universal language. When I launched a network in Turkey, I went to the local mall, and they had a magic kiosk. And like all magicians, you look around me, I collect stuff. And went up to the guy. Guy didn't speak English or Spanish, and I didn't speak Turkish, even though I was launching a network in Turkey. And so I took out a deck of cards, actually took it out of his hand, did a couple of things for him. He did a couple of things for me. And now we're communicating. And all of a sudden, I've got 4 or 5 people around me that don't necessarily speak English. And yet they're laughing and having a great time, and you can write out all the right points and stuff. And I realized then that magic really becomes a universal language. Later on, when I traveled in Africa, I had the good fortune to do that on assignment for CNN at one point. You go into these villages, which you had to be a little careful about in terms of the magic you did, but something as simple as putting a coin out of a kid's ear was amazing. You got these wonderful smiles, and I certainly didn't speak the language. They didn't speak my language either. But there was this one moment where everything was cool and everything was good. And that's what I've tried to replicate. It's the same reason I got into journalism. I want to make a difference in people's lives. The way I got into journalism, somewhat brutal in terms of what happened, but it put me on a path where I realized that I could make a difference in people's worlds. Well, as a journalist, I did that for 4 years. And as a magician, I'm still doing that, because I am, for whatever moment, well, you can't see her, so the screen is...
Yeah, something clicked on here, so I'm going to try to fix it here. I don't think that's what I wanted to do. You think I was new at this. Sorry, guys.
Lower the screen intensity, so it's not so bright.
Well, here we go.
So when you sit there and you try to make a difference in people's lives, opportunities happen for you. And that's the kind of magic that I want to do. I don't want to do kid magic. There's nothing wrong with it. Absolutely nothing wrong with it. I don't want to do clown magic. There are people, I'm wearing a 4F button right here. 4F is one of the premier close-up magicians conferences in the world. It's invitation only.
Rolando, I'm going to interrupt you for just a quick second. Okay, there we go. I think I should be back. I had a couple complaints. People messaged me that the lighting was bad, and I want to make sure that so I went to fix it, and I screwed everything up. I want to make sure that everybody's back. Let me see. Okay, somebody send me a message if it works now. I'm sorry, Rolando. I've done this for 6 weeks, and then they changed it up today. And all right, it looks like we're good. Maybe. Are we all good, folks? Somebody message me and tell me if we're good. Okay, we're good. I'm sorry. Please start over.
So basically, where I was at was, I got into magic for a lot of the same reasons that I got into journalism, to make a difference in people's lives, to try and bring something positive to their lives. And now that I'm retired as a journalist, I get the benefit of continuing to do that. And there's nothing wrong with, kid show magicians or other kinds of performers. Or I was telling you about 4F and some of the world-class close-up performers that things right in front of your nose that are mind-boggling, right? But who am I? I'm a the person who tells stories. And at the end of the day, when I leave, I want you to go away thinking, oh, I didn't know that, or that was fascinating, or you know what, I completely lost myself in what they were talking about for a while. Your new effect that you've been talking about is that's kind of the embodiment of that, right? You're telling the story wrapped around these artifacts that you have. And if you're doing it right, those people are going to forget about everything else in their life for this amount of time. And if you've done that, you're successful. So the difference between a magician, in my opinion, that does fancy card tricks, and I take my hat off to them because it takes years and years and years of dedication and practice to do that, is they'll create a moment, right, of wow, or they'll create a moment of, wow, how did he do that? I want to create a memory that will last a lifetime.
Right.
That's the difference for me.
Right. And I love that. I appreciate it. You know, you see the card tricks, when we talked about this a while ago, that card tricks aren't necessarily magic. I asked you, I said, are card tricks magic? And I said, I don't think so. And you said they could be.
Depends on how you frame it.
Right. And I thought that was awesome. So yeah, you mentioned it, and I failed to get to it earlier, but I do have an effect coming out today. As a matter of fact, it's my first ever real magic trick that I've come up with that we're going to release to the public. So I'll go ahead and tell you where you can get it real quick and kind of give you a little bit of information. Rolando was one of the very few performers out there that I trusted with his thoughts on it. So I sent him an early copy of it. He had very nice things to say. A couple other of my friends that got them. Calvin Von Crush, who's not a performer yet, but he's getting there. He's the Occult Collector on Amazon Prime show. And my friend James Corbin and a couple other friends of mine got these, and I wanted to have them work through. As everybody watching knows, I love New Orleans, and I know you spent some time in New Orleans in 2019, and you know why I love it. And the idea of the Blue Book is a big deal, and the Blue Book is a register almost of Storyville, of the era of prostitution in New Orleans. And I have come up with a routine and a whole bigger seance show called the Storyville Seance. And part of that is thanks to the genius and the gentleman that is Jim Cleefield. You know Jim Cleefield at Rolando, and he is such a kind man. He let me borrow a method of his, and with Vic Nadata at Gemini Artifacts, we came up with 38 blocks. It's available right now at Gemini Artifacts. We just put it up, and Vic will put the link in the comments. It's $100. You get the prop and the download right away of the instructions. The price goes up on June 14th. Here's the deal on the deal, and I don't want to turn this into a sales pitch, but this is kind of awesome. On June 14th, Dacre Stoker is going to be my guest, the great-grandnephew of Bram Stoker of Dracula. Gemini Artifacts recently produced an amazing, beautiful reproduction copy of the first U.S. edition of Dracula. If you buy 38 blocks between now and June 14th, you'll go into a drawing, and on the 14th of June, Dacre Stoker will draw a name, and you'll win one of the artist proofs versions of Dracula. So Gemini Artifacts, you put the link up. It's 38 blocks. If you get it and have any questions, feel free to reach out. I don't want to get into it too much because I hope Rolando, I hope you perform it. I see some of my other friends that have it in the world, and I hope they perform it. It really is something, and I'm really proud of how it turned out. James Corbin from New Orleans Secrets was a big help on it with the history and the backstory of New Orleans. So, you said such kind things about it. So enough of my sales pitch, but Vic will put the link up here shortly, and we'll see if we can't get some of these in the hands of magicians to work with. So when you and what I do is I usually find a story and then build a prop around it, or find a prop and build a story around it. Very rarely do I perform something the way the instructions say. How do you form your show? The recent show that I saw you do was based on Houdini's venture in and out of spiritualism. How did you set about forming your show around props, or around routines, or around stories?
I think you're exactly right. Sometimes the prop calls to you. You see it and you think, when you use prop, sometimes it's an art here. Let me go to what I call my bits and bobs box.
Yeah, and I don't mean magic prop. Sometimes a prop is a watch, or yeah.
That's why I want to clarify this, okay? Okay, so when he's talking about props, he's using the vernacular of the magic world, right? We're not necessarily, let's see if you can see this. This is a turn of the century pendulum. Okay? It's just gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. Found it in a pawn shop.
Right.
Right? It instantly called to me. And I have, a half dozen ideas and concepts and things like that are built around this particular artifact. Right? I don't know the provenance of it. I don't know who it belongs to. There's some vague stories. This is from New Orleans, as it turns out. And so I think that there are moments where the artifact calls to you, and then you go to your internal knowledge base, whatever that may be, and there will be a story that's there. And unfortunately, usually it's like 3 o'clock in the morning and you're trying to sleep and you're tossing and turning and it's rolling around in your head. And you got to get up in the middle of the night to write it down so that you can get it out of your head so that you can actually go back to sleep.
And we're going to come back to that because I've noticed a couple of times now you've had an idea and you've written it in that book. And I do it. I have my note cards, and I've been writing on note cards when I have ideas. So we'll come back to that. But please, I want to talk about your journaling as well.
So, and then other times there's, well, this is actually a good time. Okay, so I keep what's called a commonplace book, and I've kept them for years. And the difference between a commonplace book and a diary is that a commonplace book, something that goes back to the ancient Greeks, Aristotle, Bacon, Sir Francis Bacon, Isaac Newton, Da Vinci kept them. You come across a piece of information and you put it in this book. And I've got, all kinds of, this is one, I don't know if you can really see that.
That's beautiful. Yeah, that's great.
And there's all kinds of material in it, okay? And the idea is it goes in the commonplace book. And then from there, at some point you go back, you reread it. And then if you're going to do more on it, you want to learn more about it, then it goes probably into a more formal journal these days in the computer, right? And so, for example, so here's a quote. Fear does not stop death, it stops life. Worrying about it does take away tomorrow's troubles. It doesn't take away tomorrow's troubles, but it does take away today's peace. I have no idea where I'm going to use that, but it'll get used somewhere.
Right.
If nothing else, in a conversation with someone, right? And just see if I can come up with something just out of. I've got notes on deicide, the killing of a god or deity. How to read a church. If you walk into a church, everything has a meaning, whether you realize it or not. And so all of those things together form the basis for where the story may come from. Sometimes you walk in and you see something in a church and all of a sudden the story writes itself, and then you go looking for the artifact. And by the way, the commonplace note, I've got, that's why I have it open, right? If David Parr happens to be watching, he's going to wonder how come I don't have note cards. Usually I carry 3x5 note cards,
right,
rather than the journals with me when I'm traveling and stuff to make it easier to do it on the spur of the moment, right? Now, some people will say, can't you put it in your computer? Yeah, you can do all of those things. I just, there is something for me when I pick up a fountain pen in particular on a journal, and I have all kinds of different leather journals and different bindings and different insignias and stuff. To me, that is just part of the process. It opens up that other side of me that's very creative and allows me to do the kinds of things that I enjoy doing. By the way, you like the box?
That's a great box. That's a beautiful box.
Actually, one of Paul Prather's articles.
Prater and I were supposed to go out and do our tour this year. We should have. We had 16 shows. Prater is a great guy. He'll be on in a few weeks. So I will make sure that I let him know you sang his praises. Not that he needs it. His ego's already as tall as he is.
Be nice.
He wouldn't doubt that I would say something. So the other thing about those books is that when you're gone and somebody finds these books, they're going to go through it, and it's going to be like a whole Indiana Jones movie, them trying to figure out what the hell you were talking about with all these random thoughts and these random pieces. I think that's pretty fun.
Well, yeah, in my particular case, I think I've got more than 25 of these that go back years.
That's great. So do you ever pull them out?
And they're not necessarily in chronological order, because sometimes I'll start in one notebook and I'll be somewhere and I'll start over here, and it works back and forth. I came across something that I wrote when I was about 18 or 19 years old. It had to do with my grandmother and a paranormal experience that I had. And so I hadn't thought of that particular experience in several decades. Right now I realize, it's one of those things that form you, or at least go into your thinking. And since we're talking about the mystery collection and things that deal with those kinds of things.
Well, I'll get to my question, and then we'll go over the list of stuff we had talked about earlier. We'll answer some questions. I don't know if I've told you the story. I know some of my friends have heard the story. Several years ago, my friend Lou Weimeisner, who performs in Fort Collins, Colorado, under the name The Great Lou Dini. And Lou is my mentor and one of my best friends, and one of my favorite people in the entire world. He and I went and saw a lecture with Luber Fielder, the great Luber Fielder, and it was a question and answer. And they asked him the question about how he got involved with making miniature tricks, miniature things. And he started telling this story, and he said, when I was a kid growing up in Poland, I was always in trouble for fidgeting with stuff. And he'd say, so one day we had a guest speaker. When I was a young kid, we had a guest speaker at my school. So they made me clear off my desk and get rid of everything out of my pockets and put my hands on my desk like this during the entire time of the guest speaker, because they didn't want me fidgeting and showing disrespect to the guest speaker. And everybody kind of chuckles, and he says, so then in walks the guest speaker, and it's Adolf Hitler. Right. And so we all get this look on our face like, oh, this is real history. This is amazing. And I don't remember the moderator's name. Lou, if he's watching, he'll remind me. Text it to me, Lou, and we'll see. The moderator said, okay, so enough of that. Let's get back to the little pencil you're working on. And everybody in the audience is like, we're this close to hearing a firsthand account of one of the biggest things in history. So when you said that you knew some Pancho Villa stories that were told to you, I've kept this in my mind. It's been in the front of my mind since you said that I've got to hear some Pancho Villa stories. I am a huge Ambrose Bierce nerd. And Ambrose Bierce, the occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, and he disappeared. And I think his last correspondence said he was joining Pancho Villa, and he was going to write about it, and then he disappeared. So I would love to hear some of your stories of your grandfather and Pancho Villa, and if you would repeat the story about Pancho Villa's widow that was pretty moving that you told me in South Carolina.
So my grandfather on my father's side was a general in the Mexican army during the Revolution, and during that time, he sided with, and at some point against, Pancho Villa and Emiliano Zapata, who started the revolution. And it's kind of murky because they flip back and forth in terms of, in that period of time, Pancho Villa at one point was with the government, and depending who was president, wasn't for the government, etc. So there's a lot of different moving pieces. But the point of the story is that at some point, my grandfather was tasked with finding Zapata and finding Pancho Villa. Now, I never met my grandfather. He died before I was born. But my father would occasionally get together for what we call parrillas in Mexico. It's basically a big barbecue on someone's ranch. And there would be all these old guys, and they'd sit around and tell stories. And those old guys were former generals and former captains and majors and colonels in the military that served with them, right? So you would hear stories that would come up about Pancho Villa or Zapata or the revolution. And when my grandfather on my maternal side was very ill in Del Rio, Texas, we had him in the hospital there. I went to visit him, and I was young. I think I was maybe 7, 8, maybe 10 years old, max 10. Right? Dad calls me aside, and he says, come here, I want you to meet someone. Now, you have to understand that Pancho Villa had several wives. Okay, he had one wife who is his legitimate wife, and what I mean by that is that's the one that the courts over time have said that that's his wife. But he had other more than mistresses.
Gotcha.
The reason I'm prefacing this is the one point of this one meeting is a little fuzzy. Is I remember the lady as being Doña Luz, which would have been his first wife, the one that everyone in the government, everybody considers his first and legitimate heir and wife. There were several others, so I could be wrong on the Doña Luz part. What I do have absolutely clear in my mind is at one point she looked at my father, whose name is Francisco, which is long for Pancho, right? Francisco and Pancho are the same thing. And she looks at him, and I remember him introducing me to her and saying, "This is Doña Luz, Pancho Villa's wife."
Wow.
And she looked at me and she looked at my dad and she goes, "Panchito se parece al general," referring to me, which translates to, "Frank, he looks like the general."
Wow.
A reference to my grandfather, because no one called my grandfather. I mean, every reference, even my father, every reference I've ever heard to my grandfather on that side of the family, he's referred to as the general.
That is awesome. That is awesome.
And so that memory is really strong. I wish that part of it, the part where he compared me or she compared me to my grandfather is really clear. Whether it was Doña Luz or one of the other ones is a little more murky for me.
Yeah.
But I grew up with all these, what we would call old fogies now, and the stories they would tell were always fascinating, horseback riding and how they, gathered ammunition and all these other things. And so that's the background. And years later, I came to find out that the Mexican Revolution actually was the result of a movement called Spiritism, which is an offshoot of spiritualism. So what most people don't realize about spiritualism, I'm segueing away from your question.
No, you've answered my question, and that actually is on my list next to talk about spiritualism and the Mexican Revolution.
The spiritualism in the United States, where it started, this is one of the first things that happened in the United States that went to England as opposed to something from England coming back this way, created a series of ripple effects. And most people don't realize that among its ripple effects were two key things. It gave women who at that time had no power, it empowered them and took them out of the parlor and into public view with a tremendous amount of authority, which eventually led to women's suffrage. That's the first thing. The second thing is spiritualism directly led to the Mexican Revolution, because the person who started the Mexican Revolution was not only a spiritualist, but channeled different revolutionaries from different times. There's an incredible book by C.M. Mayo called Metaphysical Odyssey into the Mexican Revolution. So if you have an interest in it, it's all about Madero.
I will post a link to that book. I'll post a link on the Facebook page for this event. I'll post a link to the Amazon site for that book.
It's an amazing book that talks about Francisco Madero, the leader of 1910's revolution and president of Mexico. He was the person that brought two spiritism conferences to Mexico City prior to the revolution. And it was those spirits that said to him, "This is what you have to do. This is when you should start it." Now, I'm always quick to point out that the same spirits that told him to do this neglected to tell him the night he was going to be assassinated that he was going to be assassinated.
Right.
So you got to take it all with a grain of salt. But the point is, there is a very strong connection to what spiritualism and spiritism did. Now, the difference between spiritualism and spiritism, and then I'll let you ask some more questions, is spiritualism basically says there are people who have passed on to the other side, who have knowledge, and are willing to come back and share that knowledge because they're more evolved than we are. Okay. The key difference between spiritualism and spiritism is spiritists believed in reincarnation. Spiritualism stops once you get to the other side of the veil. You evolve on the other side of the veil, what's called Summerland, if you will. But you pretty much stay there, except for these visits to enlighten us. And they're willing to help us, right? Whereas spiritism adds the concept of reincarnation.
So earlier in the week,
I'm sorry if I am.
No, you're Rolando, I could hit play and just listen to you talk for 2 hours. And so the earlier in the week we talked a little bit about our personal beliefs, and we kind of shared some stories about that. And where do you fall in that spiritism and spiritualism? Where are you on the line? Not saying that those are the only two options, but you and I talked about you have definitive examples in your life where you believe you were protected. Your life was saved by a guardian angel. Without a doubt, your life was saved.
Yes.
So if you would tell that story in kind of describing your beliefs.
So let me frame this for you. I'm not a particularly religious person. I am Catholic, was raised in Catholic and practice it. But like most Catholics, it's Christmas, Easter, funerals, weddings, and a couple of Sundays in between. I very clearly have had experiences that I, as a skeptical, hard-nosed journalist who have investigated these things, can't explain how they happen the way I experienced them. Can I replicate some of them? Yes, under the right circumstances. But in those moments, I can't. And so therefore, I have to believe that there's something else out there that we just may not be aware of now, similar to people weren't aware of the telegraph and things like that, at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. But until I can find an explanation that satisfies me, I have to believe there is this other element. So let me give you a good example and a bad example if I have to. Okay. And when I say good and bad, one basically scared the daylights out of me, and the other saved my life.
Right.
So that's my definition of good and bad. I grew up in a house on the Texas-Mexico border that was haunted. We had a ghost. Everybody in the family knew Herbie. That's what we called him, right? And Herbie would slam doors, and you could see the key turn in a door, et cetera, in this house. And I didn't realize everyone else didn't have a ghost until I mentioned it to a teacher in school, and she totally wigged out.
Wow, yeah.
But he was never threatening. And interestingly, a follow-up to that particular story is decades later, that particular house is now the head of the house that is an office for the district attorney's office.
Wow.
In the city of where I grew up. And my brother and my sister went to look at the office, kind of reminiscing. And as they were leaving, one of the secretaries said, "Do you all ever see a woman walking on the second floor?" And all of us have at some point or another. And so of all the things for this woman to say to my brother and my sister, because there was no conversation about that.
Right.
There was no point in saying it. They had just visited to see what it looked like now that they'd remodel it and turn it into an office. So apparently whatever was there was still there. So in that house, the negative experience was this. One night I was up late, I think it was about 14 or so, and I was reading a book called The Cardinal. And my house has steps. It's a two-story building. And when you go up the steps, there are 3 places going up that creak significantly, right? So if you were sneaking home after being out after curfew, you knew that you stepped over these 2 places. So I'm sitting there reading, the door's closed, and I hear the first creak, which doesn't make any sense because there's no other than my parents and my younger sister, and I mean much younger sister, I'm the only one there. And then I can hear a thump and another footfall and another footfall. And I'm thinking to myself, if it's someone in the family, they'll skip over the next step because of the noise. And you hear that particular step completely creak.
Wow.
And I look at the door is closed to the hallway. And the jamb jiggles, the door jamb. And then as I'm looking, I'm seeing a black cloud coming under the doorstep. And I'm paralyzed. Totally, I can't move, I have nothing. Now, typical of many Hispanic homes, somewhere in the room, there's usually a rosary and a scapular, right? In my case, my grandmother had hung mine on a light above the bed. Right? And I knew I needed to get to the rosary. I couldn't move. I mean, I knew intellectually I needed to get to it. And it was terrifying. This thing was black and terrifying. And finally, I threw the covers up, and in throwing the covers up, I hit the rosary shadow crossed the black that was coming under the door and it vanished. Now, my dilemma was to get to my mother and dad's room on the other side of the hall, I had to open that door and get across. So I spent the rest of the night with the light on and the rosary in my hands. Yeah, it's the only negative experience I ever had in that house, and it wasn't Herbie, it was something else.
Okay. Well, I want to put a pin in that, and after the positive experience, I want to come back and talk about that. So.
Okay. So now the positive experience. I was in San Antonio, my first job in journalism, and a guy named Ira Atterbury opened fire on the Fiesta Parade, Battle of Flowers Parade in San Antonio. Now, I was off that day, but my instinct, journalist, is you run toward the bullets. So I ran to where all of the action was, right? And in those days, to do a live shot, there was none of the hydraulics that we had now where the mast went up by itself or anything. No. There's a big red band, and I'm sitting catty corner to where he's shooting from, and I've got to get up on top of the roof and manually put up a 50-pound satellite dish. Right? I'm not even doubting for a second what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm totally on instinct, absolutely journalistic mode, right? So I climb on the top, I pull the pin that holds it in place, and I pushed it up. And as I pushed it up, I heard my family and my guardian angels call me Rolly. They don't call me Rolando. In my ear, I heard a male voice say, "Rolly, stop." And I froze for a split second, and in that split second, I felt the whoosh of a bullet and the window on the other side of me shattered. That split second, the difference between me freezing for a second and that was my head being in the path.
It's crazy.
Now, I'm in the middle on top of the truck. There is nobody around me, and nobody certainly that knows me by Rolly there.
Right.
Imagine all the screaming, all the police sirens, the gunfire going off. It's not like I'm in a quiet little place and I hear someone call my name. This was right here. Flash forward about 5 years. I'm in Utah. There was an avalanche, and I got in a helicopter. We went to cover the avalanche, and we landed on the road, and we're going to have to hike all the way in. And in that moment, he needed to get down and up. So it was a kind of a touch and go landing. I jumped out, and the rule in the helicopter was you never go around the back of the helicopter because you can't see the prop, the tail prop, right? You always go around the front. I grab my stuff. I take 4 steps to the back, and I clearly hear, "Rolly, stop," except in a female voice. Nobody else is out there but me. My cameraman's on the other side. And I realized I was heading for that prop. So I came back and came around to the other side. So I'm going to say that some entity, my guardian angels, which I believe I have 2 of, like everyone does, based on my particular religious faith, right? Saved my life.
So do you think, and this is going to sound, do you think they were relatives? Do you think they were assigned to you? Do you think, I mean, and I don't have an answer yet, and I don't mean to make light of it, but do you think they were, I mean.
No, okay, if you follow my particular belief system, then when you're born, you're assigned a guardian angel. We all are, sometimes 2. Depends on how much trouble you're going to be, I think. That's a joke. Irreverent joke. And more than once, there are times, any number of times where instinct, I'm going down and I mean, I've been shot at several times, right? So I'm rushing toward the bullets, so to speak, and suddenly I'll turn right instead of left, just on instinct, not any verbal thing, right? Some people would call it instinct. It's I'm being guided, and I've learned a long time ago to just follow that, rather than fight it, rather than question it. I just learned a long time ago that I'm going to listen to what that voice is. All of us have that. We're all born with it, in my opinion. It's just as you get older, you put up walls in reality and and the other side of reality, whatever that may be, it's harder and harder to, it's separated. Instead of it being indistinguishable, it's separated by rational thought and the way you think and all these other things, right?
Well, to quote,
my grandmother taught me early on never to lose that other side. And I think that's what made me a good reporter, and that's what makes me a good communicator. And so I can't answer those two.
Well, and to quote Robert McCammon in Boy's Life, we get that belief churched out, washed out, bathed out, spanked out, and schooled out of us. You know, as we get told to be put on the straight and narrow and told to act our age. You know, and little kids, I had, and you saw part of it at East Coast. I had an imaginary friend when I was a kid named Yehudi, and that is absolutely 100% true. And Yehudi got me into some trouble, but Yehudi also told me not to get into a car one day. A car pulled up in my front and said, "Hey, you know, I need some help finding my dog. Would you hop in and help me?" And Yehudi said, "We're not going to do it." So maybe Yehudi was my one of mine. You know, who knows? Who knows? So, go ahead.
There are a lot of ways to rationalize it for people who either don't believe or don't want to believe, and that's okay. I don't try and convince people of what I saw. I'm going to share what I saw, and we're going to kick it around a bit. And if eventually you choose to file it away as, wow, that was interesting, fine. If it opens a door in your own thinking because of, you know, your own experiences that you haven't looked at, then that's great too. I'm not here to preach the gospel of believe in ghosts, goblins, and the supernatural. I'm simply here to say, hey, these things have happened to me over the course of my life. I haven't found a rational explanation, and I'm comfortable with the fact that I haven't, and I'm comfortable with what happened as life learning experiences.
I have to make notes because the flow chart of this conversation, I want to come back to different things. I'm going to go ahead and hit this way. You said, so do you believe that this is going to put you on the spot a little bit, and I'm going to apologize in advance. You're not there to convince people of a story, and you're not there to try to change their beliefs. What is your experience as a journalism? We'll take the magic and the spiritualism and the paranormal out. Your experience as a journalism. What is wrong? What is guiding the mistrust of journalism today? Is it because they don't have that belief that they're not trying? You're trying to tell the story. You're not trying to persuade the story. You're not trying to influence the story. Am I making sense with my question?
You are.
Okay.
And I'm not going to dodge the question. I'm simply going to say there are a lot of complicating factors that go into it. Journalism and journalists today are certainly blamed for a large portion of it. The current administration is to blame for it, and so is the way our social climate is right now.
Okay.
And it's going to be interesting because someone is going to assume that because I put the administration to blame here, I sit on one side of the fence or another. It's going to be very interesting because I've been instantly just about pissed off about half the people that are out there.
Not the people that are watching my show.
What I'm saying here is
right.
There are equal parts of blame to go around.
Understood.
Okay? Now, from a journalistic point of view, the way I was trained to be a journalist, people ask me, don't you hate being retired right now with all the stuff going on? And the answer is no. Because I wouldn't be able to do the kind of journalism that is being done right now. And that's not an indictment of the journalists that are working right now. They're working in a social and political environment that hasn't been this bad since the Nixon administration. On both counts. You know, during the height of the anti-journalism movement was the Nixon administration. And then my generation kind of came through and we got rid of most of it. And now we're kind of back where we were and even worse than where we were. So everyone's to blame, including society, right? But my style of journalism is I'm going to give you information that is condensed so that you can understand it of this side of the story and this side of the story. And what you do with that information is your business. Once it goes out of here, it doesn't really matter what you do to it. It's not quite true, but it does. What you do with it. I'm hoping I've given you information for you to make a decision based on the prism of your life, your social status, your religious background, whatever it is that you want to make it. But my job stopped at trying to make you think of a particular perspective. All right. Now, during my time, there was investigative journalism and advocacy journalism, and then this other, what I call old school pure journalism. All right. And like magic, the house of journalism has many rooms. As long as it was clearly labeled as an investigative piece, you knew what you were getting. That would have been the old 60 Minutes, right? Mm-hmm. If you clearly saw something as advocacy journalism, you were taking on a cause for some reason, and it was labeled as that, or it was labeled as an editorial, or it was labeled as commentary. So you as a viewer, and I'm speaking journalism as a TV person, but it applies to the print, okay? As a reader and a viewer, knew, oh, they're giving me an editorial. In fact, for a long time, you had to have editorial on there, right? It had to be outside of the newscast. Couldn't be in the newscast. Think about that.
Right, remember.
In the local newscast, the editorial, the general manager usually came on with an editorial comment.
And it would say editorial. Yep.
Absolutely. Think about that, right? Or commentary.
Yeah,
clearly.
Yep.
So you knew what you were getting. And then you had the everyday journalism that you knew was supposed to be balanced. That's all changed now. Now you have people that are being pushed in directions, and you have a lot of people who are experts who are measured by how loud they can scream, and the loudest voice wins, as opposed to the one with the rational thinking, okay, or the best argument or the most logical argument. Now, in society as a whole, in my opinion, we're suffering from confirmation bias.
Right.
We seek out the same kinds of points of view to the exclusion of others. And that has contributed to this particular phenomena of rage between the White House and journalists. There was always tension, but now I would call it as a rage.
Right.
Right. And so, again, here we go. I'm going to get myself in trouble. But if the president comes out and says, I'm going to do this, he usually says, we're going to do this. Rarely does he say, and the reasons are boom, 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 boom. As a journalist, I say, okay, you're going to do that. Why are you going to do it, and what's your justification? The minute you try to get this particular administration to justify, they absolutely get angry. Now, never mind that they probably thought it out, and they have a list of justifications. And in fact, if those justifications had simply been put on the table at the very beginning, the journalist in me is going, okay, I understand what he's doing, I'm going to go report this. But because these justifications are not there, and it takes on this aura of, well, it's because I know better than everybody, and I'm smarter, and my administration is the best, the journalist in me wants to say, okay, but why are we doing this? Help me understand what's happening, right? And I get pissed off as a journalist because I can't get to that. He gets pissed off with the journalist because they're trying to get to that.
Right.
Society looks at us and says, oh, how dare they challenge the president of the United States?
Right.
The White House, right? And so it's an absolute no-win situation. Now let's look at society as a whole. You know, one of the things I miss the most? Having a conversation with someone that I may not agree with, listening to their point of view, and then we walk away friends.
Yeah.
Right now, if a person says, I believe this, and I say, well, you know, I'm not sure I agree, instantly they go for the throat.
It's me versus you, and we can't agree on this, we can't agree on this, we can't agree on this. Absolutely.
And not just that, you're an absolute idiot.
Right. You're a bad guy. You're the bad guy.
And it's like, whoa. Help me understand your point of view, because you might convince me.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't convince me, it's okay too.
We're still pals. Yep.
And that's missing a lot in society. You know, East Coast Spirit Sessions, for those of you who don't know, it's an incredible convention that's held in
Steve Gibson just joined us, so Steve's watching. So,
and along with the gathering, which happens in November in Dokabal, I don't want to leave them out. But let's talk about East Coast Spirit Sessions for a second, because there's an example here that I want to use. East Coast Spirit Session is a gathering of mystery entertainers, practitioners in the mystic arts, and as well as believers and non-believers in those arts. Everything from seance to psychic readings to anything, you know, everything from Catholics to Jewish people to Satanists and pagans. And I was going to one, and I stopped off to visit a friend of mine from college, and we had lunch. And so she says, why would you go to something like that? And I said, well, why wouldn't I?
Mm-hmm.
He goes, well, why would you want to spend time with pagans, non-Christians, et cetera, Satanists and stuff? I said, because, well, I enjoy spending time with these people because they're good people, regardless of what the religious group. They're a lot of fun to be with. And I always learn something. Doesn't always mean I agree with it, but I always learn stuff. And I'm open-minded enough and comfortable enough to do that, right? And then we had this one conversation we're having right now about how, wow, I'd forgotten what it is to go into something and just enjoy the conversation without being labeled one thing or another in the conversation, right? Or having to prove my point. And if I don't prove my point, the person is, or if I don't concede to a point, the person is no longer going to be my friend.
Right.
So it's happening all over society.
Well, I love your comments and your story about journalism. I've always had a deep fascination with journalism, and I'll tell you when it started. I was 13 years old, and I was sitting at a burger place in Aspen, Colorado, and I met Hunter Thompson. And it was one of I love it.
Journalism.
It was one of the probably half dozen times in my life. I am fortunate enough that there's probably about a half dozen times in my life that I got to hang out with Hunter S. Thompson. And
there's one journalist that the line between reality and psychedelic unreality was very blurred a lot of the time.
You know, and that's what I love about it is that, you know, we have this, the kids today, and I sound like the oldest man in the world saying kids today. They know about Hunter Thompson from Drugs and Guns. But if you've ever read, and I'm sure you have, Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail, 1972, that should be required text for political science majors. That really should be. So I met him when I was 13 for the first time at a place called Boogie's Diner in downtown Aspen. And he was on roller skates with a sombrero and 2 bottles of tequila in holsters on the side. And I told my dad, I said, I don't know who that guy is, but I think I like that guy. So my dad walked over and said, this is my son, and introduced me to him. And there's a long, maybe a whole issue or episode of this on my relationship with Hunter Thompson. But for my high school graduation, I got a first edition copy of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas signed to Paul. Don't try this at home. But what I want to say is that I've had. Oh, go ahead.
We talked earlier about why I got into magic and why I do journalism. So let me explain to you how I got into journalism.
Please.
One of the key questions I always ask someone who I'm going to hire as a journalist for one of my newsrooms is, why are you doing this? And there's a group that really answers very quickly, and there's a group that doesn't quite know, and then there's a group that want to be stars. Mm-hmm. Right? So in my case, I was about 16 years old, working at a radio station in Eagle Pass, and an 83-year-old woman named Crescencia Campos opened the door to a guy on a hot day, and the guy wanted water. She turned around to get him the water. He took a hammer and bludgeoned her to death. All right. And I happened to be the news director at that time, because in the summer she'd go off for 4 weeks, and I got to be news director for the radio station. And I was incensed completely about this. Just absolutely crazy. It just was wrong at so many levels, right? And she didn't have a family or anything. This was decades before what you would call the police shows that you know, America's Most Wanted and all that. It was just wrong. And I did story after story, trying to keep the story alive, and lo and behold, they caught the guy. And then they tried him, and I was there in the court when he was sentenced. And I walked out of there, and I said, and I thought to myself, I made a difference for her. No one was there to advocate for her. The police were advocating for her, don't get me wrong.
But they've got their hands full with a bunch of other stuff.
Right? And that's when I realized I wanted to be a journalist. That's when I knew I could make a difference in the world. You could come from a small town. English is my second language. I didn't start speaking English until I was first grade full time, right? So I come from a small town on the border. At that time, it was about maybe 8,000 or 9,000. And I've made a difference around the world to billions of people, not millions, billions of people as a result of where my career path. And we all have to, when I do speeches, I talk about, we all have to start somewhere. I started in a small border town with a lot of other great people who are still friends of mine. And we all went on to do things that most people would think you couldn't based on our backgrounds and based on where we came from. So magic to me is just an extension of that. I continue to try and make a difference in people's lives, if only for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes when I'm performing.
You know, the last thing about journalism, then I want to get back to the pin about the negative experience you had with Herbie, or not, it wasn't Herbie, but it was in your house. Mm-hmm. I often have this conversation. I just recently had it with my friend James Corbin, and I think you know James. He runs New Orleans Secrets down in New Orleans. I miss Hunter Thompson quite a bit because I want to know what he would have to say, and I would have loved to read his Monday ESPN Hey Rube column about all what's going on today. I mean, is there journalism like that left? You know, I really had hoped Vice would be that. But Vice has kind of given up on that. But is there journalism that is not corporate journalism and not answering to the ads? Is there journalism left like that?
It's there. It's absolutely there everywhere. What I said about journalism today sounds like an indictment on everybody and everything. All I'm saying right now is that there are 3 factors that are so powerful that they're overshadowing everything else. And there's also a style of journalism now that's become necessary because of the internet, instantaneous communication, where reporters don't necessarily have a chance to think through a word choice or think through a historical perspective on a piece, because it used to be, unless I was working in radio was great training for being on TV, because in radio you got the story and you were on the air like that. Right. TV was different. You get up in the morning, you get your assignment, you may have to do it in a live shot, but your piece wasn't due till 6 o'clock that night, whatever the piece was. So you had a chance to think about it, you had a chance to write it, you had a chance to massage the copy, to get just the right word and put it all together for your 6 o'clock newscast, right? Now you come out of a courtroom, for example, and you better be able to talk about it for the next 45 minutes with perspective and examples at the turn of a dial. Right.
And that answers one of the questions we just got. One of the questions that just came up on the line is, do you think the rise of the 24-hour news network has contributed to this? And then you just answered that.
Not the rise of the 24-hour news network. God knows I launched 4 of them, so I'm pretty much an expert in that. That actually helped because it gave a bigger news window that allowed you to get more perspective in during the course of the day. So you actually got more of an opportunity to get more information to the audience than you ever had before.
Okay.
The flip side to that is, yes, there's this instantaneous thing that happened that created that. But that was going to happen whether it was in TV or the internet or whatever, right? Now, so no, I don't believe the 24-hour network gave it. I think, having lived through that era, I basically came up through CNN when CNN was an infant. It helped in a lot of different ways because it allowed me to give context that I couldn't give before in a 2-minute soundbite. I could do the story here, and then during the course of the day, amplify the theme and actually dedicate an hour to it at the end of the evening if I wanted to, or 30 minutes, or 5 minutes, or 10 minutes, or whatever it was going to be. I never could do that before. So in that sense, it gave you more depth. However, as we moved through the cycle, people began to want opinions, and ratings began to become more important. And the best way to get ratings is through confrontation. And so talking heads became ratings winners. And in that shift, the journalist anchor went from being an anchor who got you through your hour or your 45 minutes or your 30 minutes, depending where on time you were, and became part of the opinion of the story. Now, there is a whole school of journalism that says journalists are biased. That's bullcrap. Okay, I've never met a good journalist who was unbiased. I mean, what did I say? What I'm trying to say is there was a school of thought that supposedly says journalists are unbiased.
Right.
That's what I'm trying to say.
We're with you.
That's crap. Okay. I've never met a good journalist, myself included, that didn't have a bias. The good journalists simply recognize their biases and either lay them out so people are clear about that, or they have editors above them who help counteract the biases. But I want you to be biased. I want you to be passionate. I want you to put your life experience into your story when you're telling the story, because that's what's going to make it resonate with an audience out there. Not a dispassionate story fact teller that's just telling you words and information, right? But the line got blurred between what was your opinion and what was fact and what was the other side of the story. And now you throw in where we are in society and everything else, and you have this big mess. But there is journalism out there. There's no question that there's journalism out there. And by the way, there is journalism that's really good on the left, and there's journalism that's really good on the right.
I have my master's degree in history. I went to school to be a history professor, and my minor was political science. And I remember for all my political science classes, the Christian Science Monitor was required reading. And I remember them saying, this is real news. This is where you're going to get the most compact facts. And I read it, and I understood why we got it. But so I want to talk about the negative experience you had. I have a hit list of people that I want to have on this little conversations deal. And Bob Larson is on that list. Do you know who Bob Larson is? The Exorcist, Bob Larson. He runs a for-profit church. I don't know if you can call it for-profit church, but he is the Exorcist. Oh, hold on, real quick. John Morton and Zeke Powers are joined in. Guys, both Rolando and I have already said nice things about both of you. So you joined too late. But I've tried to get Bob Larson, and he won't reply back. But he is a professional exorcist. If you were to have those experiences today in that house, where the door, the steps, and the going for the rosary, that would be fodder for the Travel Channel. That would be exploited for the Travel Channel. So there's several parts to this question. I know you have an exorcism story. But also, what do you think about the idea, having had this story? I mean, when was this story in your house? How old were you?
Well, all the time I was growing up, so I would have been anywhere from 9 through the time that I left at 16 to go to college. So
this has been before the wedding DJ has the ghost show on the Travel Channel. But right. But what I'm saying, so what do you think, having had these experiences as a child that were real and part of your family, part of your culture, and part of your upbringing? How does that translate into how popular the ghost show and the exorcism and the whole idea of exploiting and finding ghosts today? What are your thoughts on those two?
All of us have had an experience in our life that we can't explain. It may not be as dark as what I explained, maybe as light as what I explained, but we've all had that. We've all had that moment of deja vu. We've all had that moment where we picked up the phone and before caller ID and knew who was on the other end of the line, right? And people either have forgotten it or really don't remember it or don't want to remember it, or all of the above. But I think it's a universal thing that's inherent in all of us. And I think that when you touch on the nerves, I'll give you an example. I described to you the sounds of the steps going up. It's 3 o'clock in the morning,
right?
Et cetera, right?
And that was how many years ago?
I don't know. I was a teenager. Maybe I was 13 or 14.
But you remember it. It's that big of a deal that you remember it. You remember it.
Remember, you can't see it, but I've got goosebumps every time.
And that's how powerful that moment is.
So I've told that story as part of a presentation, right? Except I left out I said, how many of you have basements? Or have had a house in the basement, right? A number of people raised their hand and said, isn't it amazing how there's always 1 or 2 stairs that squeak? And how scary that can be? And then I relate the same story without letting them know that they're coming up the stairs to the second floor. And they have lived that moment where they heard a noise. It sounded like footsteps. The wind kind of cocked the door the right way and it rattled. These are all the rationalizations that you go through, right? And so it's a universal thing, right? I always joke about the fact, okay, so why is it that they always put the light switch in the basement on the other side of the room and you have to go across the dark room to get to the light switch?
Right.
And people laugh. Why? Because they've all experienced a similar thing.
Right. Perfect. So your exorcism story. We talked a little bit about it earlier this week. That was something that we have on our list of things. The other thing I want to talk. Oh, go ahead.
You want me to go tell a story now?
Yeah. No. Go ahead. Go ahead.
So you asked me what is terrifying to you.
Yeah, that's one of the questions I send to everybody who's on this is what scares you? Is there anything that's too crossing the line for you? So Rolando, Santos, what scares you?
As I said, I've been shot at. I've crashed in a helicopter. I've had all these experiences. And there are only two things that scare me. And I don't know why. There's probably something wrong with me. I tend to run to the bullets and I run to the sirens and stuff. It's just the journalist in me, right? And I have this thing about, as a journalist, I'm bulletproof. I'm not, but you have this thing that happens psychologically where you just feel that way. So the scary one was that one thing when I was a kid. And then the other one was, as an adult, I was doing some research on exorcism, and I had a chance to talk to some exorcists. They couldn't go on camera, they couldn't do on the record interviews, but I got a chance to talk to them. So over the course of a couple of weeks, I met with them. There were three, so I say that. And toward the end of the second session, I walked out and we discussed a little bit about negative energy and evil energy and karma and things like that. So it's kind of an interesting conversation. And at the very end of the conversation, he says, the truth is, Rolando, I don't always win. Sometimes I lose.
That's pretty heavy.
Sometimes I fight to a draw, which means a soul is going to go to purgatory. And the devil has miracles too. Totally blew my mind.
Absolutely.
My whole world was shattered. I had never really contemplated the possibility that good would not triumph over evil. Eventually it does. I've come to that conclusion, or at least that's my rationalization. But for weeks, I re-examined my faith. Actually kind of came back to the church for a while. Re-examined philosophy. I absolutely changed my thinking in my life to have this concept where you have an exorcist who's telling me, sometimes I don't win, or it's a temporary win.
Yeah. Sometimes it's Empire Strikes Back. It's not always Return of the Jedi, right? I mean, sometimes the bad guy wins.
I'm gonna call you on this one. You know what? You're making light of it. You don't understand how profoundly.
No, and I apologize. I'm not making light of it.
I never truly understood. I mean, I've been in life and death situations. I've covered all kinds of chaos. I covered a story, a volcano that erupted in Colombia, and there was a little girl trapped in muck is not the right word. The mud had liquefied, right? And you were walking on sandbags, so that was the only thing that floated to get to her. And we were trying to pull her out, and we couldn't pull her out. And finally realized that the reason we couldn't pull her out is because her mother had pushed her through to save her, and her mother had basically rigor mortis had set it under the mud, right? And we wound up cutting her arms off to free the little girl. So I had already gone through this phase of questioning why God lets bad things happen to good people. And I came to the ultimate conclusion that only God knows what he's doing, and I have to trust that particular.
And Rolando, I did.
In order to keep my sanity, right?
I
so then I'll go along this path, And suddenly, evil doesn't always, I mean, good doesn't always triumph. That rocked me to the core. It took me a good year to get through that one.
And I meant no disrespect.
I'm just saying, it sounds just like a statement, and I don't know if I gave it enough emphasis to people. Think about the statement that was just said. I don't
always win.
And the devil sometimes has his own version of miracles.
Well, in that umbrella of belief, that has been the struggle since the day the earth was created, since the day man set foot on the earth. I mean, that has been the struggle since the beginning of time. So and I apologize. I meant zero. I did not mean to make light of it.
No. I reacted only because there have been profound moments in my life.
And that, I understand. That's heavy.
The birth of my twin daughters was one of the most, with all due respect to the day I got wedding, that particular moment I've never felt closer to my wife. I've never felt more joy, more awe at the power of life, the power of the Creator, whatever your particular version of that is, than that. But the flip side is the other one, right? And so it really was a true changing point in my growth as a person when I came to that understanding that, and it actually made me a better reporter because I quit trying to figure out why things happen, in the sense of I feel all the emotions when bad things happen to good people.
Mm-hmm.
But the only way because you see so much of it as a journalist, the only way to put it in a compartment is to understand that there's usually a divine purpose for everything. We just don't know what it is. And that's true of any religion. I've been lucky. I launched a network in an Islamic country.
Wow.
Right? So I got a chance to, in Istanbul, spend a lot. It's an incredible city, right? And the history of Constantinople and everything. And when you look at religions across the world, if you really look at them objectively, they all have very similar basis and stories.
Mm-hmm.
It's the most amazing thing.
You know, I've said on this often, and a lot of my friends that know me, I'm very skeptical. I'm this much spiritual, but there are two places in the world that I feel I feel it, and Istanbul is one. I got to spend a day there a couple of years ago, and we went to the Blue Mosque and the Spice Market and the Grand Bazaar and just the touristy spots. But we also spent a lot of time just walking the streets, and I feel the heaviness. I understand Istanbul is a pretty heavy spiritual place, and the other place is and I had somebody complain a couple weeks ago that all I do is talk about New Orleans, but New Orleans is the other place that I just feel this spiritualness.
Energy. I go with my daughter in New Orleans, and I can't help but just get relaxed, and the music just feels great, and I wind up writing great stories after I'm done there. There is something to all of the energy of that place that just sets me personally, I don't know, not everyone feels it. I just get very creative, and suddenly I'm revitalized. And the Hagia Sophia, that's an interesting story for me. The Hagia Sophia, which means Lady of Wisdom, was actually a Catholic church before it was converted to a mosque. It sits opposite of the Blue Mosque, okay? And when I went there, which would have been 1997 or so, the first thing that struck me was the bronze doors go back to like 300 AD. Right. Think about it. And I'm sitting there thinking, wow, talk about feeling infinitesimal. It's like, then you walk in, and they were at that moment renovating the inside. And so they had pulled out half of all of the ceramic tiles, and you could see the Catholic half versus the Islamic half. And on the wall were the Stations of the Cross in gold. And back then, you could touch them. So, of course, I went up there, and it was the most powerful experience to realize. And then you see the other half of it, and you're sitting there thinking, wow, it really put it into a box for me. Also made me understand, when you look at the continuity of time, man, you were just this infinitesimal grain of sand.
this week was my wife and my 15th wedding anniversary.
Congratulations.
And, thanks. That just, it's not that big a deal. It just means that 15 years ago, a woman said, all right. My wife is a saint for putting up with the bullshit that I've put her through, but I got her, I always try to do something ridiculous for our anniversary. And I got her a necklace from 1350 BC Egypt. And it's the beads. It's beads that they found in a pot and they made a necklace out of it. And so I gave it to her, and it was, I mean, expensive is a relative term. It was not that expensive, but I gave it to her, and I'm like, this is from 1300 BC. And I printed out the emperor, or the pharaoh then was King Tut's father, Nefertiti's husband, Amenhotep. So I explained all this to her, and it went, she didn't care as much as I did. But the idea that this is 1300 BC, when I went to the Grand Bazaar in Turkey, it was, I had done a bunch of research, and I'd watched all these videos and read all these books about it to find out that some of the stalls in the Grand Bazaar are family owned since biblical times. It's the same family. So actually, I think my story that I introduced myself to you was about our friend Soydan, our mutual friend Soydan, who is from Turkey, and he just chimed in, and he's going to be my guest on the show in a few weeks. He is my Turkey go-to guy about Turkey. So, but I love that idea that in standing in Turkey and breathing that air and being in that center that had pre-biblical history. That's heavy. That's pretty awesome.
Oh, just amazing.
So,
what questions do we have? Do we have any questions?
So we've got a few. Let's see here. Soydan chimed in and just said that it's one of his favorite places to visit. So if you guys have any questions, come in. I've got a few here written out that we talked about earlier in the week. But if you have any questions, Lothar is joined us. So Lothar has, he says, whoa boy, about Bob Larson. So Lothar, send me a message about what you know about Bob Larson. I tried to sign up for his school, and I don't know if he'll take me. So a couple of the things that I have notes that I wanted to talk to you about, Rolando, the women's movement in the idea of the Mexican Revolution. And I love your stories about the Mexican Revolution because you have a real connection to them. So how does that coordinate? How does that connect with the women's movement?
When I did a speech at the Bremen Museum of Jewish History in Atlanta a couple of years ago that had to deal with, as part of their Houdini exhibit, that had to deal with Houdini's role in spiritualism. And
that's the lecture that I saw at East Coast?
That's the one you saw, right?
Perfect.
So I'd been researching it for a little over a year or so, and doing spiritualism research longer than that. And I think I did not understand until I started researching this, the seismic revolution that the Fox sisters in Lilydale created in March, whatever it was, 18 something or other. For those of you who don't know, the Fox sisters were the two young girls who claimed to be getting messages from Mr. Splitfoot. And it turns out years later, they admitted that they were cracking their knuckles and their ankles and stuff. And
well, two of the three, right? Two of the three. One of the sisters would never admit to it.
One of them actually became the person who basically became their manager.
Right.
Two of the three sisters. And so what it teed off was a wave of spiritualism movement that permeated and changed history, literally. Mexican Revolution is the most obvious one. The other one was spiritualism, because it was the first thing that came from the States, went back to England and became table rapping and other things like that, created a situation where the woman who lived only in the parlor at that moment in time came out of the parlor into the public venue with a lot of authority, because she was the medium. You couldn't go to the other side without the person in the middle. That That's part of the spiritualism movement. They talk to you through mediums, not direct communication, which is the difference between ghosts and things like that, right? And so she's the one who has the power. And that, by many historians' point of view, eventually led to the emancipation of women, not only from the household, but also put them in the public eye in a very powerful position.
So I'm thinking you need to write a book on the Mexican Revolution.
No, there are much better people than that. And I got to tell you, it's tough to get. Unfortunately, a lot of the records were destroyed in an earthquake that happened, I want to say, in 1985 or so in Mexico City. A lot of the archives and stuff that hold, like my grandfather's archives and records, are all gone. There's no way I can reconstruct them. I know who he was, what he looked like. I have photos of him in newspaper articles that my grandmother kept. So I know what he looked like, what he was, and what his division was, and things like that. And it was interesting. There was one photo in there that, if I look at the faces and the names, they all are vaguely familiar with people that I have met later on as old men.
Right.
With my dad.
Awesome. Well, if you guys have any questions, put them on the Facebook. I've got a few more here. I said in my introduction that you've interviewed serial killers to saints. One of the ones that you had mentioned was you had a run-in with Richard Ramirez, and you also interviewed Mother Teresa. Talk a little bit about and maybe not just focus on those two. Who were some of the highlights, the Rolando Santos greatest hits of your journalism career, and some of the things that you learned from interviewing celebrities, newsmakers, politicians, world leaders?
I learned more from people, just everyday people, about how to face the reality of life. I mean, one of the things that I always taught my reporters was, when you're in this situation and someone has just died, the worst thing you can do is stick a mic in their face and say, "How do you feel?" Because my reaction would be, "How the hell do you think I feel, you dumb idiot?"
Right. Get out of my face.
In terms of the language, right? So my approach always was, "Would you tell me something about the person who died so I could understand who he was?" And that generally, not only did it give you a much better response, it certainly made for a much better soundbite, et cetera, because you got to know the person that passed away or whatever, right? So if you approach it from a humanistic point of view, there's a lot of difference that in the answers you get, which means you can tell more of the story from an engaging perspective as opposed to just a perspective of facts and figures. My encounter with Richard Ramirez was very brief. It was one of those, typical, he's being walked down and he's talking. My reaction when I saw him is, there's nothing behind the eyes. He was just evil, for lack of a better word. Just absolutely, there was nothing there. Charles Manson, who I just passed because he was in San Quentin when I worked in San Francisco, and would occasionally get a letter or something from him because he used to watch our newscast, was more manipulative. He enjoyed that. In my head, there's a difference between the two. Not that either one of them is particularly socially redeeming. I'm just saying.
Right.
Manson was a master manipulator, and got into your head in 30 seconds, just boom, like that. Ramirez, on the other hand, was just evil, plain and simple. Right? Now, contrast that with Mother Teresa. So Mother Teresa is coming to San Jose, California for some kind of event, and I'm going to interview her, and we're in this auditorium, and there's, 5,000 people or more in the auditorium. And there's all kinds of noise and everything else. And my photographer at the time, a guy named Buster DeBruner, was an old Navy veteran. I mean, tattoos up to here, served on the Enterprise, World War II. We're talking a vet in every sense of the word, right? Survived kamikaze attacks. I mean, just, if you scratch below the surface, he actually was a nice guy, but the surface was all... The
surface was rough, right? Yeah.
A name like Buster, you can imagine, right? So Buster and I go over there, and when you walk in about 5 to 10 feet of her circle, everything just kind of calms down. I interviewed her, asked her a few questions, and then as I walked away, the world came rushing back in. It was the most amazing thing, because if you look back on the video at the time, or actually it was filmed at the time, maybe it was video. I don't recall. The audio is what I want to get to. You can hear a lot of noise, and then she speaks, and she speaks very softly, and yet you hear her clear as a bell. And then there's all this other noise that you pull back on. And I turned around to Buster to ask a question, and Buster had this one tear coming down his eyes. And he felt it too. And in my head, I certainly was in the presence of a saint. It was the most amazing experience, the sense of calm. I know she's somewhat controversial in some areas and things like that, but that was my experience with her. I didn't go in expecting any of that. I was on a deadline. I needed to ask the questions. I know this sounds bad, but she was basically just another interview.
Right.
Right. I didn't go in with this, oh my God, it's Mother Teresa. It wasn't. I don't go gaga over. I mean, I've interviewed kings and queens and everything in between, and it's just, no, I'm not a fanboy. It's just not my thing, right?
Yeah.
And so I came out of there, and it was really clear that I had met a person that was absolutely special.
You know, I don't have I have a story similar, but obviously not the Mother Teresa level. I was at a bar in Las Vegas at a casino at the MGM Grand years ago. I don't know. And I was waiting for some friends to come in. So I just pulled into the bar and sat down. Well, Muhammad Ali walked in. And the whole room just sunk. And I'm not comparing Muhammad Ali to Mother Teresa, but what I'm saying is that the whole room just kind of all of a sudden just sunk. And that you knew that somebody had just walked in. Now Muhammad was in his later years, and he was not well, and he had people kind of helping him through. But it was one of those things. He was doing an autograph signing at one of the autograph stores. But it was just one of those things that you just feel this presence. And I there's a couple times in my life I was lucky enough to take a group of high school kids when I was in college to meet the Pope. And I was in the same room as John Paul II, the Pope, and you just kind of, whether your personal feelings, your personal beliefs aside, you just feel this level of importance, and you feel this level of I don't know. And I've said it a couple times, and it's kind of lost its importance. This level of heaviness, and I imagine, you know, sitting there talking to Mother Teresa, no matter how you felt about her as an individual or her as her, you just feel this importance to the world about that individual.
I can honestly say I didn't feel that. I walked away thinking this was amazing. It was a totally different. Now, I say I'm not a fanboy. There are one or two exceptions, and I'll tell you a funny story.
Please.
I lived in Sausalito when I worked in San Francisco, and there's a place on the main drag in Sausalito with a place called the No Name Bar, and the reason it's called the No Name Bar is it's just a door. You know, you're in Sausalito, you know where the No Name Bar is. Everybody knows where it is, right? Just there's no signs. And so I used to hang out there from time to time. So one day I walked in, sat down, and ordered a drink, and in the corner is Jerry Garcia.
Wow, yeah.
And I'm like, oh my God, it's Jerry Garcia. And I'm like, for the first time in a long time, I'm like, okay, this is kind of really cool. And so I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden the bartender puts a drink in front of me, and I've got one in my hand. I'm going, I don't need a refill. He goes, oh no, it's not from me, it's from him. He says he watches you, and he likes the fact that there's a Hispanic here.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, okay, I have my moments of fanboys.
Right. So that leads me to a question. I'm an autograph collector, and I have a pretty fun collection of autographs.
Here's why. Because when I was on air, people were always walking up to get my autograph.
Yeah.
And so, true story. I've decided I'm going to marry my wife, and I'm going to ask her, the lady who's not my wife, and I'm going to ask her to marry me. So we go to this place called Tommaso's. Great pizza in North Beach. Had a wood-burning oven, which at the time you just didn't find them, right? So we go to Tommaso's. And I'm there, and everything is all set up. candlelight, the whole 9 yards. And the busboys who are all Hispanic, every time I'm about to ask them, come up and ask for an autograph. Right? And so I'm giving the autograph. And then I'm about to ask again, some lady walks up and says, I'm da-da-da-da-da, and I watch you all the time. And so 3 times I tried to ask her to marry me, and 3 times somebody walked up for autograph. So I finally gave up, took her to the Golden Gate Bridge, got her on the other side of the bridge so we could see San Francisco, and I asked her to marry me on the other side of the Golden Gate Bridge, where she could see San Francisco. So much more romantic. But my point being is, because I've been on the flip side of that,
I understand.
I don't ask for autographs.
Right. Well, and most of mine I buy.
You know what? I could have a major league collection.
No, that's where I'm going with this. Is I go to book signings and I buy them from I don't stalk the people. I go where they're doing signings and they're for pay. But my question is, I have a short list of people I'm missing from my collection that I want to complete my collection. Who are the people that you in your vast career of journalism, who do you wish, who's on your I missed this interview list? If you could have picked people that were during your time, who would you have wanted to talk with?
I have been asked the question, if you had a chance to go through and talk to anybody in history, who would you talk to? Mm-hmm. Right. The obvious choices are, you'd love to talk to Jesus.
Right.
Or the apostles. I think that would be fascinating. My list is a little different. I would like to spend an evening with Queen Elizabeth.
Wow.
She is the most remarkable woman of our century.
I think my wife, that is you and my wife. So if you ever get that, will you take my wife with you?
About what she has seen, what she has
absolutely
done, and good and bad. That would be major for me, right? The other person, I would like to talk to Leonardo da Vinci. I want to. What did he see? How did he see these things? How did he get a bird in flight and was able to accurately draw all of those things? Right. And the third person I'd like to talk to would be Einstein.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
third person obviously would be Jesus if you could, but let's just take him the obvious one out for a moment.
Right.
Is there anyone on my list in the current? No, I don't. I've been really lucky. I've had a chance to either meet, interact, or ask questions of a whole lot of different people. The current Queen of Spain used to be my anchor, and
you told me that the other day. That is. Tell us the story real quick. We're down to about 20 minutes left. So if you guys have any questions, chime in, and then.
So the current Queen Letizia, I was setting up a network in Spain called CNN Plus, and I was looking for an anchor, and I had seen her working one of the Spanish language stations in the United States, and so I wanted to bring her over. Now, it was interesting because I was working for CNN at the time, and we were the consultant to set up CNN Plus there. I was the official in charge, or the representative in charge. And because it was a joint venture, I didn't have full control over the choices, but I had 3 vetoes. And I learned a long time ago to always make sure you have 3 vetoes when you're in a consultant role of any kind, right? And they didn't want her because she had been in the United States and was contaminated, even though she was a Spaniard. Their words, not mine, okay? They wanted these pure journalists. There's a lot of journalistic hierarchyism that went in there and all this other stuff. And I said, veto, right here, I'm putting her in. And I did. So if you wonder whether I have an eye for talent, obviously that's where the prince saw her, and eventually they met, and now they're king and queen of Spain.
Awesome.
I also went shopping with her mother-in-law one time. This is a funny story. I'm launching CNN Spanish at CNN Center in Atlanta, and she's come in for the Olympics with her son, and they shut the whole place down so they can take her to the CNN store to get CNN merchandise. Well, Tom Johnson, an amazing journalist that I owe a lot to, was the head of CNN at the time. So he calls me and he goes, the Queen of Spain is here, I need you to, and I'm going like, oh my God, what's the protocol for her? Do I need to do that? So anyway, I come down and I introduce myself. She's very lovely, calls me Rolando, and she goes, "No, don't worry about it. I don't, there's nothing. I don't have to. What's the word? Curtsy or anything else." And she's very low-key. So I'm going shopping with it. And when I say by going shopping, we're going around and she's looking at different things and she's talking to me and asking me things about Chile, whether we're going to, about the CNN, and asking me about whether we're going to go to other networks. And at that point, we hadn't seen anything behind CNN and Espanol, and that had not launched yet right there. So Spain wasn't, CNN Blue Switch, it wasn't an idea at that point. I mean, it may have been an idea, but it wasn't anything on the radar, much less the other networks. And so I'm talking to her and she puts up this shirt and she goes, "Do you think this is a good color for me?" And I'm like, "I think that color would be better than this color because it matches your eyes." And it was a truthful answer, right? What do you do when a queen asks you?
Well, I don't know. Yeah, right. I don't know. You're damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? I mean, it's.
I'm totally out of my element at this point, right? She was wonderful. I had a great time there with her. She's very down to earth. And my time in Spain, of course, was just as good. I mean, perfect country.
I was lucky enough a couple of years ago to spend, and my friend Giorgio Tsoukalos he's online, so he and I got to spend 19 days trekking through the jungles of Peru and Bolivia, looking at some of the old ancient sites. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask. What do you think? What do you think about the ancient alien theory about South America? I mean, that's really the kind of the hotbed of the idea of alien visitation. And I know that's a complete, to go from the Queen of Spain story to this, but I'm trying to check off my list. I've only got you for about 20 more minutes. So,
but for all of my belief that there is something else out there besides what we see with our five senses. What that is, I don't know. And as again, I'm going to preface it by saying, I'm not trying to convince anybody. I just have seen things that lead me to believe these things. The one thing that there's a rational part of me that says it's hard for me to believe that we are the only life form in the universe. Just the concept. That would be why I want to talk to Einstein, quite frankly.
Right.
It's hard for me to believe that on a rational basis. Yet I'm not a civilization led by aliens fan or follower. I'm not saying it can't happen. It doesn't resonate with me. Yet, if you look at Machu Picchu.
We spent two days there. Yeah.
Machu Picchu is just, plus it has this, there's this energy there that if you did not have to do it, I would have put that on your bucket list.
And that is close to the third spot where I felt the heaviness, of New Orleans and Istanbul.
And then the Nazca lines, right, that you see from.
Yep.
Is that what that is?
I got the astronaut tattoo, the Nazca line tattoo, and I was on the plane. We flew over it. Went on that trip, and one of my dear friends, and I've mentioned him on every show, and I haven't done it yet. So my friend John Bentley from Waterford, Ireland, was sitting next to me, and I said, "When I get back to the U.S., I'm getting that tattooed on my arm," and he laughed. I did it.
So you look at that, and you just think to yourself, well, anything is possible. But I can't, for some reason, those particular theories never excited me.
No, I get it. Yeah.
I just refuse to completely discount them because it's hard for me to rationally say, gee, how can you be the only species in the universe?
Right. So we've got a question from Ron Brown. He says, who were your magical influences? So who are the people that inspire you as a magician?
Ed Solomon, who most of you don't know, but
Ed Solomon,
yes, the community would know who that is. But for most people,
yep.
Larry White, who's also passed away, Phil Wilmarth, and these people were the ones that took me from being a magician and moved me into the storytelling aspect, the mystery entertainment aspect of magic. For those of you who are not familiar with magic, and of course Eugene Berger, who's a mentor of mine. Okay, Eugene's at the top of the list. Eugene used to say there are many rooms in the House of Magic, and he's right. You have the kid show performers, you have people who do card magic, close-up magic, stage magic, illusion magic. And then you have within this group an area known as what used to be called bizarre magic. And bizarre magic was seances, psychic abilities, paranormal, the occult, and the supernatural. And then you have mentalism. And they're not in any particular order. I'm just saying they're all in this house, right? And within the bizarre community, it started off, and our roots in that area was very ritualistic, dark and somewhat satanic overtones. And then it evolved into more of a storytelling kind of magic, which is where it presently is right now. In fact, several of us have discussed several times, what do you call this? I mean, right now I'm using the word mystery entertainment for lack of a better term, because it doesn't fall into the traditional ritualistic cowl-wearing kind of magic where the person is dressed in black and looks like Max Maybe.
Well, and I call my show an evening.
Like Anton Ray, right? It's not that anymore. There is a segment of that, and that's part of our history, and I'm not saying we should ignore it. I'm just curious because I'm not that. I do storytelling magic, which is I put interesting stories that I hope will engage you using either magic, legerdemain, or other things to entertain you. For example, my company name has nothing to do with magic, and it doesn't say magician on the bottom or anything like that. My company name is History, Mystery, and Magic. It's a trademark name, and magic is with a K. That's what I do. I tell you a little history, a little mystery, and we do a little magic.
My tagline on my show is an evening of mystery, entertainment, and illusion.
Yeah. So I'm not tied into any one thing, whether it's mentalism or card magic or whatever. I'm free to move up and down the different riffs, see whatever I happen to be working on, or whatever story, at that moment in time tells or suits my fancy. I think also magic as an art form is evolving, and it is an art form. As I say, there are all these different houses within it. So to answer your question, Eugene would certainly be at the top of it. Ed Solomon, Everett Booking, Larry.
Everett Booking is watching the show. He's logged in, so.
Larry's certainly one of them. And then there are contemporary magicians Paul, of course, is very, very good. Prather is just amazing. Paul Prather. You're going to get a chance to talk to him. I think Prather is just amazing. And now that his significant other and he, Sarah, are together and have been for the last, 3 or 4 years, that's a real power couple. I mean, he's incredibly, not only is he a creator and amazing writer, but she's also theater trained. She's incredible when it comes to bouncing things. A smart,
she's sharp. Sarah's very sharp.
Great thinker. She'll fill in the holes where something doesn't sound logical or whatever, and she's a performer in her own right. And to me right now, that's the power couple in the mystery entertainment.
Prater, Paul and I.
I'm sounding like a broken record. Vince Wilson's coming up, and Vince has taken the art of magic in the direction of ghost hunting and seances and mystery entertainment. Paul Voudini.
Yes.
Incredible lecture yesterday on the internet. My gosh, you just kind of go down,
Well, I got to tell you, Prater and I were supposed to do that tour. And when I decided, I quit and I don't know if you know this story about me. I spent 18 years in finance. And shortly before my 40th birthday, I decided I'm going to do this full time. And that's about the time that Prater decided he was going to do it full time and do law part time. And this tour was it was going to be the 5th anniversary of me leaving my job to do this. And there's nobody that I thought would fit better than Paul Prater. Paul is one of my dear friends. I love Paul Prater. And we had all these great plans, and it was really heartbreaking. I understand people are losing jobs and losing houses and everything over this, but it really was heartbreaking to have to cancel these dates with Paul, not just because I wanted to get out and do my show and collect the money for it, but I wanted to spend that amount of time with somebody like Paul Prater on the road, and do my show and then talk about it afterwards.
I think I'm going to wrap up the other question, then I'm going to segue into what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So in the traditional magic side, it would have to be starting with Mark Wilson, who really planted the seed, as I told you when I was a kid.
Yes.
Freaking Ronnie. Everybody, like every kid of my age, we all were in love with her and lusted after her.
If you don't have the complete course to magic, you cannot call yourself a magician, right?
I got 3 volumes, including a signed autograph copy of it.
Right.
And then the great Thompsoni, obviously, Johnny Thompson, because that's where he was the one who kind of jump-started me into the magic area, right? And I think more contemporary, I've got a really good friend named Joe M. Turner out of Atlanta, who's a fantastic magician, a really good friend. And so the magic world there's this traditional magic world, and then there's this, mystery entertainment world that I was lucky enough to go into, and it's just my natural calling. And a lot of that had to do with Phil Wilmarth, specifically Ed Solomon and Eugene Berger. So I hope I answered your question.
No,
really.
absolutely.
And now, when you look at the kinds of magic, I think people think that magicians put together a trick and then they just do it. First of all, it takes a lot of practice to get it right. But putting that aside, storytelling and mystery entertainment magicians, a lot of their soul goes into their pieces. They're thought-provoking. Every word is thought of and scripted out. And there's philosophical questions you have to ask yourself. It's not a matter of I'm just going to go out and perform. I mean, let's say you have a seance act, for example. And we're asking ourselves these questions. Is a seance act a good thing after a pandemic? How is that going to play? How are you going to handle that?
Right.
There's a lot of ethics that are involved. How do you present this in this place but not in this place? And I'll be a more concrete example. John Gilmore is creating a story right now that's just phenomenal. And John, forgive me for speaking out of school here a little bit. So it has to do with a heroine of the Civil War that helped free a lot of slaves, right? It's a wonderful story that he's created. And the effect to ram home the point of the dangers and the courage of these people who ran the Underground Railroad. I asked him yesterday, I know you're coming from a place of love, and I know that you're really interested in showing the courage that these people had, but how are you going to feel performing in front of an African-American audience this effect? Or how are you going to feel if you have a person who is African-American and one who's not, and the person who makes a choice, because the end of choice is you go to freedom or you go back to slavery. That's the end choice. Turns out to be the white person who goes free, or it's an African-American person who doesn't. I mean, those are all the questions you have to ask yourself. It's a lot deeper and more complicated than simply, I'm going to do a magic trick.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the reasons I love going to East Coast Spirit Sessions, because you sit around and you talk about these philosophical points, and you can get pretty deep into them and pretty deep into your cups too while you're at it. And there are just people that are a lot smarter than just people who look at us and say, he's a magician and can do tricks. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of intellectual horsepower that goes into any trick, both non-storytelling and storytelling. But storytelling in particular requires, if you look around me, I have philosophy, I have mineralogy, I have geology, I have archaeology, I have 3 or 4 copies of the Bible, different versions of it. I have the Quran. I have every book you can imagine on folklore and mystery entertainment. And then I have magic books.
Right. Right.
I had books on physics in here, and believe me, math and physics for me are like, but you know what? I'm going to need those at some point, to be able to create the kinds of things that I want to create.
That's awesome. I always like magic conventions because it's not so much about the lectures and it's not so much about the performances. It's about the opportunity to sit down with people like you and sit down with people like John Gilmore and get to know them on a level of okay, so what do you do in this instance? What has happened to you? What has happened to you? The last show 2 weeks ago, I had Aidan Sinclair on, and we talked about some of the times that doing a theatrical seance has gone south. And one of the instances was a woman wanted to know, or the question for Spirit was she wanted her grandpa to know that she had forgiven him for raping her. Well, that is a level that is no longer entertainment. That is a level that is as a performer, I'm not going to touch. So what I did is I crumbled it up and I said I've got a bad connection. I'm not reading this one right. But the difference, the line, and this is maybe a whole nother 2 hours. The line between what people that come to our shows believe and what we're trying to do is
well, it's not a matter of there's a line there. There are ethics involved.
Right. That's
and now let me also point out there are mystery entertainers, and then there are people who are psychics,
right,
and who are seance workers, and who are spiritualists. And I'm not taking anything away from any of them, nor am I dismissing them or disbelieving in them. I'm simply saying there is a group that is an entertainment group. You said theatrical seance, which is a key phrase, theatrical seance, as opposed to a seance or automatic writing session or whatever for a true believer of spiritualism and seance work and things like that. And so you're walking this line. If you happen to be a psychic or a spiritualist, and you're also a performer, you get to answer those questions through your beliefs. But if you're a performer and you're faced with someone who believes that you have this power to do that, and you're not going to get them not to, because you've just demonstrated to them that you do, what do you do? How do you handle that person who comes to you after your show and says, I asked a question, can we have a private session to see if I can reach my grandma? What do you do?
I don't know.
If now, I'm saying if you're not a true psychic, if you're not a true believer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I could see somewhere someone saying, well, there's no such thing as true psychics and this and the other. You know what? I don't buy that at all. I think that there are truisms there that more than we realize. When I did the Houdini research, were we coming on time? Were we okay?
We got a couple minutes. If you're in a hurry, we got a couple minutes.
Real quick, when I did the Houdini research, one of the conclusions I drew, and this is my personal conclusion, is I think he was so brand conscious and he had become so associated with not believing in it that he may have missed an actual manifestation. And the second thing I've come to the conclusion of is that just because he could replicate it doesn't mean it didn't happen or couldn't happen. And that's where I think I fall on most things. I can replicate a lot of things, and if I'm there and can spot a fraud, I will certainly, call the person on that kind of stuff. But there are other things that are just, to me, defy explanation, or at least not explanation, because you can explain anything, but I haven't been able to disprove something that I personally witnessed under the conditions that I saw.
Well, and that's Penn and Teller are two of the most popular TV magicians, and they have an axe to grind. They're out there to disprove some of this stuff, and so that's a line that we have to cross sometimes on both sides. So it's my friend Aidan does it. He does it really well. And he deals with people every night that say, I believe or I don't believe. So it's It's a hard line to cross. So I've got a few. Anybody have any other questions here? We've got some people. Somebody said hi from Sweden. Somebody from Indiana. Is there anything you want to talk about at the end? Anything you want to mention?
No, you know what? I appreciate the opportunity to share my experiences and to just kind of put things on the table. Hopefully, I made you think. I think personally that anytime we can look at something and listen to the other person say it and say, no, you know what, I'm still not convinced of X, Y, Z, that's okay. It's not a problem, right? I think the biggest problem is when you look at something and refuse to take that possibility into account or that point of view into account. I have no problem with people rejecting my points of view or my experiences. I have a problem with people who reject the premise that I should even think those things without listening to what I have to say. So I appreciate you being here and listening to what I have to say. Whether you agree with me or not is just fine. But I do appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you.
So where can people find you? Do you have a public page, or do you have a?
Actually, we're in the process of doing that. Since I retired from journalism, I was in the process of putting together a website and other things. But you can find me on Facebook under Rolando Santos, right? And that's the best way to get a hold of me, I think. And you can go from there.
Well, Rolando, I appreciate it. You have been the so far. I've had a lot of my friends that I've known for a long time, and you and I are fairly new friends. And I appreciate you coming on and talking about this. We're gonna log off the public view, and if you'll stick around for a second, we'll finish up. But if anybody has any questions, real quick, we'll give you 30 seconds to come on. I'll real quick again plug. If you want to contribute to the show, it's Venmo at The Mystery Collection. Next week is Keith Olson to talk about the legend of W.D. French, one of the shows that I do, the pieces I do in my seance show. Also, GeminiArtifacts.com is our friend Vic Nadata is going to be launching 38 Blocks, one of my new effects, or my first effect that's going to be available to the public. It's live today. So Rolando, last words.
One person I forgot to mention, and I was remiss because I was thinking of 3 different things at one time, and I apologize. I really have to say thank you to Vlad for all the mentoring. Steve Gibson, who's watching, those 2 guys have been terrific. They brought me into East Coast sessions. Joseph Daniels, Tiffany Allen. When I first started going to that group, I was an absolute newbie, didn't understand, didn't know anybody, and they all made me feel at home, and they're all good friends now. And I want to make sure that they got a shout out because they're very important to me, and I apologize for not including them in the list earlier.
No, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, please look up East Coast Spirit Sessions. It really was what took me from being a friends and family performer into selling out theaters and being able to go tour and being able to travel with my show. I can specifically credit the folks at East Coast Spirit Sessions with that. And again, Steve Gibson, if you're still on, I don't know if you saw, I'm sure you saw his red light seance that he did this past year. Absolutely one of the finest seance performances I have ever seen. And I say that every time I get a chance because, Steve, you should really be proud of that. That was absolutely amazing. So all right, folks, we're going to log off. Next Sunday is Keith Olson. Again, on Venmo, it's at The Mystery Collection. Rolando Santos on Facebook. And guys, thanks a ton. I appreciate it. Zalia at the Always Lounge could use your help. Check her out. So thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate it. I'm going to log off here on the Facebook. Let me see how I can do this. Thanks, guys.